Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, recently, it seems like I keep reading more and more about IoT is promising to make our world smarter. But that can only happen when the right information is made available at the right time and in the right place. And we do have these barriers up still between our online and offline world. But what excites me is mixed reality technology that can be used simultaneously to visualize data from sensors while also integrating relevant and actionable information all within the user's environment. So if we can get to an IoT-enabled mixed reality solution that provides near immediate insight at the level depth that was previously unimaginable, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? Because that increased context provided by IoT sensor data can bring a new level of realism to that mixed reality environment, but most importantly, paves the way for a fully realised, intuitively understood evolution in computing systems. And guess what? All that is possible, and that's why I've invited today's guest on, who is Ryan Groom, Kognitiv Spark's co-founder and CEO, and he is going to join me on the podcast today to tell me all about how they are transforming the use of Microsoft HoloLens and opening our eyes to the art of the possible with mixed reality in the world of business and beyond. But enough from me. Let's get Ryan onto the podcast right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Ryan Groom. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Kognitiv Spark. And our focus is to support industrial workers remotely. And we do this mainly through the Microsoft HoloLens. So you're a remote worker and you need help for a complex troubleshooting task. This is not fixing brakes, but maybe maintenance on a sub or something in a nuclear power plant or maybe in an industrial setting. So what we do is we have that remote worker connect to an expert anywhere in the world, and that expert can push assets down to the HoloLens. So maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's photos, maybe it's an animation on how to fix something. But the worker can see that all in 3D, because we all know that the way that most of us have learned how to do everything is in 3 dimensions with our hands, and we're kids putting things in our mouth, touching things. That's how we learn. So be able to put data in the physical world, that way it alleviates the worker having to process how to fix things. They're not looking at a 2D screen, how to figure out an interface. The data's there in the most natural way that they like to consume data.
It's incredibly cool what you're doing here, because I think for most people listening, they will have heard of Microsoft HoloLens and seen the videos, etc., but possibly not seen the real world case, the real world use cases and how you guys are leveraging it. And that's one of the reasons I invited you on today, because I think IoT promises to make our world smarter, but that can only happen when the right information is available at the right time and in the right place. So can you tell me more about how this mixed reality technology can actually be used to simultaneously visualize data from sensors and integrate relevant and actionable information within that user's environment? Because it's incredibly cool, isn't it?
I love it. I mean, when I first saw the HoloLens in 2005 under NDA with Microsoft, it gave me the same feeling when I first used the Commodore 64 when I was a little kid. I got Commodore, I took the money from my grandfather and bought programming books, and it set me on the path that I'm on today. But it gave you that feeling of this is something to explore because this is new. Now, when I put the HoloLens on many years later, when I put it on my head, I said, this is the next wave of computing. And I was very excited. I bought 2 HoloLens. I told my wife, I said, look, I put it on the credit card. We're going to start this new adventure because this is the new wave of computing. And I ran around to a lot of trusted folks that I had in various customers. And the problem is, to get back to your point, is people said, this is neat, but what problem does it solve? And I was quite, sometimes deflated. Even some of my, engineering friends, they would put it on and see a hologram of a tank or a building, and they go, that's really neat, but again, what's the use? And the use started to come from 2 things. One is feeding the video stream from the HoloLens back to an expert so they can see what you're doing point of view. And a lot of folks do that. with different 2D technologies. But that was the first step. The second step was taking those holograms you see. I mean, people don't believe it until they put it on their head that here's a hologram of a tank in front of me, which I can take apart, and it looks like it's really there. But the next step is what we call live holograms, where you take that sensor data, which can be, I mean, people call it IoT is sort of the buzzword, but it's just Internet of Things. It just means sensors that are sending data to the internet, and some cloud compute is, making it into something actionable. But that sensor data, how do you bring that into the hologram? So maybe it makes it more realistic. You have a sensor in the room that's detecting light. So the shadows on the hologram are more realistic. It also knows where the walls and the ceilings and the desks and the tables are. So when you're moving a hologram around, it acts more like a real object. So it doesn't go through the table or through the wall. It actually acts more like a physical piece. And the only way that can happen is sensors in the HoloLens actually detect the different walls and ceilings, and you can actually do compute to make sure it's more realistic. But then you get into the industrial use cases where, say you're going to take apart a very serious pump, let's say. There could be pressure, there could be temperature, things that if you take it apart, you could hurt yourself. And with a HoloLens, you could actually get the IoT data from that and maybe put a 3D screen in front of it. Maybe you color it so that pump is actually red. So you've called somebody in the control room and they said, yep, they've shut that off, the temperature is low. But with the HoloLens, that you could get that actual IoT data so you actually can visually see what the different dynamics are. It gives you a more sense of depth where, you're looking at this pump, you don't know it's hot till you touch it and you burn yourself, or you take it apart and there's pressure. But if you can get that visual overlay in 3D so that pump maybe glows, so it's a warning sign not to touch it, this is where the practical use cases start to begin.
Do you have any examples or use cases of how IoT-enabled mixed reality solutions can provide that near immediate insight at a level of depth that was previously unimaginable, wasn't it, until recently?
Oh, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest things is for maintenance. When you go to a location, we've had one customer tell us one of their biggest problems is people fix the wrong thing. So there's 3 or 4 of the same object that looks quite similar, but the maintenance was done on the wrong one. Where with Vision AI that has compute on the HoloLens, is the HoloLens then can detect it's the right unit. It can bring down the maintenance schedule. So right above the unit is floating in 3D a PDF of the trouble ticket or maybe the maintenance record. And then you have a schematic on the right-hand side floating how to take it apart. And if it's complicated, you could actually bring down a 3D model and watch the animation of how to pull that apart, and you can go fast forward, rewind. And with 2D, your brain still has to interpret what to do. In 3D, and especially if it's life size, you can see exactly what you need to do. You can stop, you can walk around the hologram, you can get under it. We even have pictures of people getting on ladders and looking over on top of a hologram, laying on a ground underneath of it. So that true immersion allows you to get your brain to go, this is exactly how I do it, and now I can do it. With 2D, you're still doing that interpretation.
Where does Kognitiv Spark fit into all this? And can you tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers here?
We build a software application called RemoteSpark. It's our only focus. We build one application, and it runs on the Microsoft HoloLens. It also runs on a Windows 10 computer, or experts can be on the web. So that way, no matter where you are, if that remote worker needs assistance, you can send them a link and that will connect to the HoloLens. They can see what you see and they can start pushing digital data to you. So we empower those industrial workers to do that. That's our focus.
Incredibly cool. And do you have any use cases that you could possibly share? I know it's an audio podcast, but I'd be interested if we could help someone visualize how it would work in possibly their world.
For sure. I mean, many times it's about reducing that travel. So you have an expert maybe or you have a remote worker in a mine, and there's a situation where that mine's in a remote location and the expert can't get there for days. So they can put on the HoloLens. And what's really interesting about the HoloLens versus most VR, AR, VR is like you're in your virtual world. You're cut off and can't see the physical world. Where AR, you have to pick that device up, either a phone or a tablet, and it takes the video feed and overlays the graphics, but you're still using your hands. Where the HoloLens, you can actually see through it. So you see the digital assets and you see the physical world. And you're trying to take something apart and you can't. And that expert is a world away, maybe a week away. And you've got downtime, which is costing you money. you can now connect to that expert and they see exactly what you see. They can actually write on their screen and the ink will float in front of you where they're writing on, here, do this nut, put this bolt here, flip this switch. And they can be writing on their tablet or their phone, and you in 3D see that ink being inked up. So you know exactly what they're talking about. So you have that true connection. That's one use case. A lot of it is industrial equipment that people build in one country that's very sophisticated, send it to a manufacturing plant, and they need to hook it up for the first time and do an inspection that it's going to work properly. So right now, with the world the way it is, a lot of that travel is impossible, but they're still sending these pieces around the world. So you get a heavy piece of equipment or an industrial piece of equipment in a very sophisticated manufacturing line. Who's going to validate that that's ready to go? So that way they can connect to those experts, those people that built it. Those people walk around it with a HoloLens. They can see the point of view. They can point things out and actually do the visual inspection. And that way they can continue business.
And I would imagine there'll be a few business leaders listening. They'll be going into their office tomorrow saying to their IT director, I've heard about this incredibly cool product. I'd love to explore it. And of course, the first question they're going to ask is, well, what is the tech that makes all that possible? And what kind of file formats do you support? So for those people listening, can you tell me a little bit more about the tech that makes it all possible?
For sure. I mean, they call me the chief nerd at the office. So that's my favorite subject. So to make this all happen is the remote worker needs a Microsoft HoloLens. There's other 3D devices out there, but right now we find that's the leader and that's where we focused. The expert anywhere in the world just needs to have a web browser. And then our software called RemoteSpark. So that's a software license that goes on the HoloLens and that connects it. And we connect it all through the cloud. So we have a globally geo-replicated service. We have servers all over the world, but they're all connected as one big sort of blob. So no matter where you are, the system figures out the best way to connect your users. That way you don't have to worry about it. And as we get concentrated users in different parts of the world, we can spin up, because of the power of the cloud, in different locations. Now, there's some customers that have data governance requirements, and we do scale it down to a server so you can put it on your own infrastructure, and it can even be air-gapped. So if you're on your own private network, you're not connected to the internet, that also works. But that's as simple as it is. HoloLens, a PC, a license of our software can get you going in a half an hour. The file formats are as easy as a JPEG, a Microsoft Office file, a PDF, or the 3D is what we call a GLTF file. It's an open source spec that most 3D applications export to. So that's all you need to get going.
And just thinking out loud here, an expert that can be located anywhere in the world, who can then see the remote worker and see and use the holograph assets to support tasks, all while keeping the user heads up and hands free. When you put it all together, it really feels like a game changer moment. But I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you received from your clients?
What's really interesting is the clients that do embrace it, because there's two types of clients, because the tech is so new. Many times it goes to the innovation department and the IT people play with it and it's really cool. But it doesn't go, very far that way. But it's when we operationalize it, when someone on the shop floor actually uses it. We've had a comment from one industrial company said, it's just like we've launched our first rocket. That was one of, the best comments we could get back. Another one was, the ROI on this was 2 weeks. We didn't have to send X, Y, and Z to A, B, and C, and that saved considerable travel budget. It paid for itself in 2 weeks. So these are the kind of comments that we get back. It just opens, whole new avenues, and especially now that we can't travel like we used to, or we're figuring out we don't need to travel like we used to. It's a very enabling technology. Like the old saying goes, chaos causes growth. And a lot of people only said someday we'll do this remote compute. And in today's environment, we're forcing that fact quicker than we ever thought we would.
So can you help the listeners understand how increased context provided by IoT Sense today will bring this almost new level of realism to the mixed reality environment, and how it could actually pave the way for a full realized, intuitively understood evolution in computer systems? Because again, it's incredibly cool, isn't it?
I sit back with the development team, and it's so interesting to blue sky things that you only used to see in the movies. And these things are happening now. And for holograms to be useful, they truly need to be reflective of the physical space they're in. And that's key. So it's just not a picture. It has to be dynamic and it has to be alive. And the only way that can happen is with sensor data. And with the advent of 5G and the density of devices that now can be smart, we can get data from the door. We can get data from light sources, environmental pressure, from statistics from the devices that are running. And you bring all this real data into the world to reflect in that hologram. Like I said, the hologram reacts to physical location. Somebody walks in, the motion sensor knows that that person's there. So maybe the hologram gets out of the way or readjusts itself. So the holographic, the 3D computing space understands the presence of the people or the machinery or the environment and can adapt accordingly. If the hologram looks like a cartoon and doesn't react like it should in the real world, that people don't believe it like they should. For instance, there's another technology coming down that Microsoft and a few other folks are working on, and it's remote rendering, because the HoloLens really is like a mobile phone compute. So you only can have the complexity of the holograms can only go so far, really cartoonish. But with the cloud, we can now do that compute in the cloud, and you can do hundreds of millions of polys. So that way the holograms look real, and you plug that into the IoT sensors so that hologram reacts as it should. It creates almost a real world holographic scene.
It sounds like you've got an incredibly bright future ahead, and 2021 is going to be filled with a lot more opportunities, or at least we can hope that it will. But what's next for Kognitiv Spark? Is there anything else that you can share about what excites you about the future of remote worker support tools and leveraging mixed reality? Because it certainly seems the way forward.
Well, our first version, RemoteSpark right now, it's all about the remote worker reaches out to the expert for help. And the expert then drives that data down to the remote worker. So we're going to change that next year. The remote worker is going to be the center, and they can control the data they want. So we're working on 3D interfaces. How do you plug a 3D interface into your CRM or ERP or SharePoint? How does that worker with his fingers and gloves and tools in his hands gets the Excel file they need and be able to put it in the world? When they call an expert, that expert is no longer just sounds in their ears, but is actually an avatar floating in the purview. It's just a graphical representation. It's not like holo teleportation or anything, but it's like a robot. But the sound comes from the robot where you position it in the real world. So maybe I have Sally and Fred on the call. I put Sally to the right, Fred to the left, and that's where the audio is coming from. So it's more natural. And maybe Fred's talking and I need to hear Sally. I can mute that person. And as that person contributes 3D assets to the world, it actually populates around that avatar. So I know Sally's contributing these things, Frank is contributing those. I can pick the assets I want, put them in my real world, or even grab an asset from Fred and drop it to Sally and say, this is what he's talking about. So we're going to focus on making the remote worker the center of the universe instead of it being led by the expert.
And I'll add a video to the blog post that I will use to promote this podcast episode, just so anyone listening will be able to see how it works and understand how it could work in their world as well. But for anyone listening that would just like to find you guys online or even contact your team, what's the best way of doing that?
You can go to cognivspark.com. My Twitter is at ryangroom.com. And also just go to the webpage. You can actually search for RemoteSpark. Go to the webpage and there's lots of contact forms, or contact me directly and I'll put you in touch with the right folks.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on here today. I think we must be men of a similar age, because I too was the guy with the Commodore 64 in my formative years. And it's great to see how you've taken that journey, gone from that Commodore 64 to this mixed reality and the Microsoft HoloLens, and most importantly, solving real world problems. That's the cool bit. But more than anything, just a big thank you for taking the time out to come on here and tell me a little bit more about that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Neil. It was a pleasure.
Kognitiv Spark is a tech company and Microsoft MRPP Gold partner that have been recognised for its competency in the secure, reliable and network agnostic application of mixed reality for remote support. But its flagship product, RemoteSpark, is the incredibly cool industrial grade platform that allows a remote worker to establish a low bandwidth and yet secure audio video call with a subject matter expert when they need help to solve a complex problem. So for me, I love how the expert, who can be located anywhere in the world, can see what the remote worker sees and use holographic assets to support the task at hand, all while keeping the user's heads up and hands free. And I think we've all seen videos of HoloLens when it was released, but many of those use cases and videos that we've seen online were, let's face it, a tad gimmicky. But seeing this in action and the work that Kognitiv Spark are doing here is something that blows my mind, and it tears down those barriers between the online and offline worlds. And that is why I get quite excited about mixed reality. But I want to hear your thoughts. If you've got any experience with mixed reality, I'd love to hear from you too. So please, if you've got any questions, any insights, or you want to come on the podcast, whatever it is, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com. or pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you will find over 1,500 podcast episodes across this show, my Switched On Thinking with Netgear, and of course, Tech Fusion with Citrix. Whatever it is, hopefully I've got a bit of content that will help you see how technology works best when it brings people together. So hopefully I will speak with you bright and early tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.